Spring of 1889 set Dust Hollow ablaze with ribbons and music. Strips of colored cloth fluttered from tall posts in the town square. The fiddle sang sharp and fast. Boots hammered the plank floor in time, and the air carried the weight of laughter, smoke, and dust. Men in vests and broad hats crowded the stock auction stalls, shouting over each other, while women in flared dresses, fans fluttering in painted hands, leaned close to trade remarks, their smiles painted thick as rouge. All were merry, except one. Letitia May stood at the edge of the crowd, pressed against a weather-worn fence. Her dress was faded, patched in too many places, its hem stained with road dust and resin. Her boots cracked, leather peeling from their soles. Yet her back stayed straight, her chin lifted. In her arms she held a bundle of wildflowers wrapped in a strip of gray cloth. It was the only thing upon her that seemed untouched by want. Purple, yellow, and white blossoms tangled together, carrying a clean prairie scent strong enough to cut through the grease smoke that drifted across the square. People stared, then whispered, "She's the tavern's cleaning girl, ain't she? Lord above, that rag she's wearin'. Look there! Who'd think her flowers would win?" For they had. While the merchant daughters spent on roses hauled in from Kansas City, Letitia had walked the open plain and gathered what the land offered. And against every guess, the judges had placed her first. When the deputy mayor read her name from the platform, Letitia May, the square fell still. Then came the hiss of breath, the half-laughed scoff, the mutter of disbelief. Letitia froze, eyes wide, certain she had misheard. But the call came again, louder, firmer. "Step forward and claim your prize." Heat rose to her cheeks. Never had the whole town turned its eyes on her at once. Each step from the fence to the platform burned like walking coals. Her fingers tightened on the flowers, sweat beading her palms though the spring breeze stayed cool. Beside the stage stood Alice Whitmore, daughter of the wealthiest trader in Dust Hollow. Her gown of green silk clung and shimmered with white lace, her hair a crown of pale curls, her painted mouth bent into a sly curl. As Letitia drew near, Alice shifted, feigning a stumble. A barrel set on a stand tipped at her touch. The crash came sudden. Dirty water, sour with soap, cascaded down Letitia's dress. The bouquet slipped from her arms, petals crushed under boots before she could stoop. Silence struck like a whip. Then laughter cracked wide, rolling over the square like fire through dry grass. "No flower can hide the stink of poor. Think she's a bride, do ya? Look at her dress, filthier than a stable rag." Letitia trembled. She did not weep. She did not flee. She bent instead, gathering torn blossoms with careful hands, laying each battered stem across her palm. Water dripped heavy from her hem, but her eyes held steady, refusing to bow. And then a voice, not loud, yet sharp enough to cut the noise clean. "That's enough." From the far end of the street, a man walked forward. A long black coat trailed dust behind him. Broad-shouldered, tall, his stride unhurried, unshaken. Elias Thorne, master of Thorne Ranch, the man the town called the Silent Baron. Rarely seen, rarer still heard. The crowd held its breath as he neared. Letitia raised her gaze. Brown eyes met his. His were gray as storm clouds, cold yet fathomless. Her chest tightened. Without a word, he slipped the coat from his shoulders and set it across hers, covering the soaked fabric, steadying her frame. The act, simple as it was, weighed heavier than any speech. He turned then, facing the gathered square. His voice rang out, deep and even. My ranch has need of a woman such as her. Gasps broke. Whispers surged. Is he jestin'? The Baron? Silent all these years, and now for her? Alice Whitmore's painted lips drained pale. Letitia stood frozen. His words tore down walls she had long felt caged within. For the first time, amid the sting of ridicule, a man of power had stepped forward and chosen to stand with her. The coat on her shoulders held his warmth. It set her hands trembling, though her eyes did not flinch. She looked into him, brown depths reflecting silver gray. In that brief span, the world fell dim around them. Only the two remained, and Dust Hollow, for the first time, did not laugh. The lodging at the end of Dust Hollow's alley was little more than a loft above the saloon. Thin wood walls let the wind creep through their cracks. The stench of whiskey and tobacco drifted up from below, clinging to every board. On a narrow bed pressed against the wall lay Henry, Letitia's younger brother. His body curled tight, coughs tearing his chest, each breath a rasp like embers on the verge of dying. Letitia sat beside him, laying a damp cloth across his brow. Her face showed weariness, yet her eyes held hard resolve. A knock thudded against the door, slow, heavy, like the weight of the man behind it. She startled, pushed stray curls back, and went to open it. Elias Thorne stood there. The black coat he had laid across her shoulders yesterday hung folded in his arm now, as though he had not come to display it, but to set it aside. His sun-darkened face bore sharp lines, yet his eyes were steady. He inclined his head slightly. I have business to put before you. Letitia froze, her hand clutching the edge of the door. If you came to pity me, turn back. I will not. No. His reply cut firm. From the coat he drew a thick brown envelope. He set it down on the rickety table near the flickering oil lamp. A contract. Keeper of the herb garden at Thorn Ranch. A small cabin comes with it. My doctor will see to your brother Henry broke into a fit of coughing, blood speckling the cloth. Letitia bent to steady him, her heart twisting, then raised her head, her eyes fixed on the envelope as though it had burst into flame. You think I'll take your charity? Her voice caught, but stayed sharp. Elias did not sit. He stood tall, his shadow long across the floor. It isn't charity. I need the herb garden tended. You know the work of roots and leaves. I've seen it. This is wages for labor. Nothing more. Letitia strode forward, snatched up the envelope. Her fingers brushed the back of his hand. Brief, accidental. Yet heat rushed to her face. He, too, halted a fraction, a blink betraying the pause before drawing back. Silence fell, broken only by Henry's strained coughs. She unfolded the paper. Neat script. A clear contract. Elias Thorne's signature across the bottom. Payment fair, not small. A doctor's promise. A cabin instead of a rented loft stinking of liquor. She folded it hard, laid it back with a slap. I don't need your pity. I live by my own hands. His eyes dimmed a shade, though his tone held steady. I do not dispense pity. I need someone like you, Letitia let out a thin laugh, half bitter, half weary. A poor colored girl, living by a saloon, trusted by no one? What use could I be to you? Elias stepped closer, close enough that she caught the smell of leather and horse liniment rising from his coat. I need someone who tends what others would cast aside. hands that do not give way before mud or sorrow. I saw you in the rain once, leading a blind woman to shelter, leaving 3 coins behind when none watched. I saw you yesterday, soaked and shamed before the whole square, yet you kept your head high. That is not weakness. That is strength, her heart hammered, but she forced her voice even. My strength is for my brother, not for pleasing a land baron. Elias said nothing. Only his gray eyes, cold yet deep, held hers, speaking the words his mouth did not. Henry coughed hard again, shaking the silence down between them. Letitia cradled him close, tears welling at the corners of her eyes. When she looked up, Elias remained. He had not moved, had not left. You need not answer tonight, he said at last, his voice lower now. Come morning, if you agree, you'll find me at the Thorn Ranch gate. If not, we'll count this talk as never spoken. He set the envelope back upon the table, turned, and stepped out. His boots struck heavy on the stairs, each tread like a drumbeat fading away. Letitia stood still, her gaze locked on the envelope. Her hand lifted, trembling, brushing the place where his hand had touched hers. The warmth lingered against her skin, no matter how he wished it gone. Outside, Dust Hollow's night pressed thick fiddle music from the festival, carrying faint across the dark. Inside the narrow room, Letitia felt another storm rise, not in the sky, but in her own heart. Nights in Dust Hollow were often quiet, but the small room at the alley's end shook with coughing that tore through the walls. Henry lay bent on the thin mattress, his bony hand clutching the sheet. The sound was no longer the dry rasp it had been, but heavy, deep, and broken in gasps. A dark stain spread across the cloth Letitia pressed to his lips. Blood. Her heart wrenched. Henry's wide eyes shone with tears, fear trembling on his mouth. Sis, I can't breathe. Letitia pulled him close, tears rising but unshed. She had never allowed herself to weep in front of him. Her voice came steady as a whisper. You're not alone, Henry. I'm here. Yet her hands shook. Her eyes strayed to the envelope on the table, the one Elias had left the night before. She had refused it, sworn she wanted no charity. But now, as blood seeped through cloth and Henry's chest heaved under the weight of pain, her pride twisted into a rope around her own throat. A cold wind whistled through the cracks, snuffing the oil lamp's flame. In the dark, she saw the truth plain. Either her brother would die in this room, or she would knock at that ranch gate. She packed a few clothes in haste, wrapped the thin blanket around Henry, and lifted him in her arms. He was so light her stomach clenched, 12 years old, yet frail as a bird's bones. Pushing the door open, she stepped into the night of Dust Hollow. The dirt road to Thorn Ranch stretched under a rising wind. Dust swirled, stinging her eyes. Her steps sank, her breath labored, but she clutched Henry tight and pressed on. The ranch gates rose from the mist, tall and cold as a fortress. Dogs barked, lantern light flared. A figure stepped from the porch of the main house. Elias Thorn. He stood against the glow, tall and unshaken. Letitia faltered, knees threatening to give way. Her lips parted, but before words formed, Henry broke into another fit, blood wetting the corner of his mouth. Without a word, Elias moved, his stride swift, his presence steady. He stopped before them, eyes passing over Letitia and resting on Henry. No shock, no reproach, only a calm depth, like river water running strong beneath stillness. He held out his arms. Letitia clutched her brother tighter, the instinct to guard rising sharp. But Henry whimpered, weak as a bird with broken wings, and in that moment she yielded. Elias lifted Henry from her hold. A man broad, scarred, accustomed to rope and rifle, yet he cradled the boy as though bearing glass. He bent his head, drew the blanket close around thin shoulders. Letitia stood struck by it, calloused hands trembling faint against frail skin. "The doctor waits," Elias said simply. His voice was low but sure, as if binding the words into law. Letitia followed, eyes fixed on him. His pace was slow, careful, as though even one rough step might bring the boy pain. Henry's head rested against his chest, and for the first time in weeks, the child's body eased. The sight pierced Letitia. The walls she had built, walls that named Elias nothing more than a lord cloaking pity and command, began to crack. In a small cabin by the stables, the old doctor was ready. He set Henry down, listened to his lungs, bound his chest. Elias stood close, silent, never turning away. Letitia lingered at the door, hands twisting the sweat-stained fabric of her dress. She watched every motion of Elias. He did not hand Henry off and retreat like men of wealth so often did. He stayed. He poured water, steadied cloth, pressed cool rags to the boy's brow when sweat poured. That night, Letitia did not close her eyes. She sat by the bed, listening to Henry's ragged breath, then turning her gaze to Elias. His shadow marked the wall in the lamp's dim glow, still and watchful. Yet his hands, scarred by years of labor, rested near the boy's arm, as if to anchor him. And in that stillness, Letitia understood. Her pride had not been broken by harsh words, but by a quiet tenderness she had never expected from a man who bore the weight of land and silence. Outside, the night wind sang through the fences, carrying the smell of damp grass. Inside, Henry's breathing steadied, and Letitia, for the first time, allowed herself to look at Elias longer than a fleeting glance. His eyes met hers, unplanned, across the small cabin. No words spoken. Yet the moment pressed heavy, enough to send a tremor through her chest. She did not look away. The first dawn on Thorn Ranch greeted Letitia with pale light pushing through thin mist. No longer the loft above a saloon reeking of liquor and smoke. Before her stretched an open sky, the scent of wet grass, and the faint trace of burned wood from a dying hearth. Henry still slept in the small cabin set aside for them, his breath steady, the color easing back into his face. Letitia stepped quietly onto the porch. What met her eyes was a world remade. White fences running along the slopes, horses grazing, cattle lowing across the fields. Behind the house lay a small square of land fenced with worn boards, a scatter of mint, thyme, and sage half strangled by weeds. Elias had told her this would be hers, the herb garden. She wrapped a scarf over her hair, rolled her sleeves, and set to work. The earth was dry, stubborn, the weeds thick. Each strike of the hoe bit into her arms, yet she did not stop. Sweat ran, darkening her back, her palms splitting at the grip of the handle. Voices rose behind her. Ranch hands had stopped, leaning on tools, arms crossed, watching. Their stares weighed heavy, part scorn, part curiosity. The colored woman, tending the herb patch? What's the Baron thinking? Let's see how long she lasts. Every word rang clear, but Letitia never turned. She pulled weeds, raised soil, tied rough twine to mark the rows. Her chest pounded, but her back stayed straight. From the far eastern fence, Elias stood, leaning on a post, arms folded, his eyes fixed on her. He did not step closer, did not speak. He watched, silent as ever. By afternoon, the wind cut across the fields, carrying sweat and soil. Letitia dragged a bundle of dry wood from the yard, the weight trembling in her arms. She turned to haul it inside when another hand steadied the load. Elias. He said nothing, only bent low, his large hand closing over her thin fingers. The callus of his palm met her cracked skin, and heat surged up her arm. Together they lifted, the bundle rising with sudden ease. Their eyes met, gray and brown, strange yet bound. Elias paused. Then he let go too quickly. The wood tipped, and Letitia caught it fast. He stepped back, face unreadable, tilting his head as though nothing had passed. No word, no smile. But Letitia knew she would not forget the moment. Night fell, the wind sharpening with cold. Letitia built a fire in the cabin, the warmth enough to keep Henry at rest. She stepped outside for air, her hands stiff with chill. Moonlight washed the yard in silver, laying its glow across barns and fields. When she turned back, she froze. Before the cabin door lay a neat pile of split logs, straight, clean, fresh cut, unlike the tangled wood she had dragged earlier. She looked around. No one. Only the dark, the snort of horses, the whisper of wind through fences. Kneeling, she pressed her hand against the wood. The edges sharp, the scent of sap still fresh. Someone had just cut them. Someone had left them without asking thanks. She did not need to wonder who. Her lips trembled, though not from the cold. Within her chest, a beat rose heavy and strange, not easily silenced. And in the dark, Letitia whispered to herself, perhaps not all silence is empty. By noon, the Texas sun poured fire over the fields. The air pressed heavy on the chest, dust rising with every gust. Letitia walked back from the herb garden behind the stables, her basket filled with mint, wormwood, and a few sprigs of sage still cool with morning dew. Sweat streaked her cheek, but her spirit was steady. For the first time in days, she felt her hands held worth beyond scrubbing floors or hauling water. They could sow, tend, and heal. A scream split the stillness. From the hay barn came a clamor. Ranch hands swarmed, horses reared, dust choking the air. Letitia dropped the basket and ran, her clogs pounding the dirt. Pushing through the wall of men, she froze at the sight. Marcus, the youngest of them, lay convulsing in the dust. His face drained white, his legs swollen and purple, blood seeping from twin punctures. "Rattler!" someone shouted. "God Almighty! It bit him in the grass by the barn!" The crowd broke in chaos, some calling for wagons, others fumbling for rope, yet none with clear action. Marcus writhed, eyes rolling, breath jagged. Letitia dropped to her knees beside him. Her hand pressed the swelling, heat burning through her palm. The eyes around her narrowed, suspicion sharp. "What's she doing? Don't let her touch him. This is life, not some trick." Her head snapped up, eyes fierce. "You want him dead? Then keep standing." The words cut silence through them. She barked again, sharp as a whip. "Bring me hot coals. Bring water. And fetch comfrey leaves from my basket. Hurry." Hesitation rippled, but her glare, harder than any they'd expected of a woman, drove two men running. She tore open Marcus's trouser leg, rinsed the bite clean, her hands shaking, but her eyes bright. When the coals arrived, she crushed mint and comfrey together, mixing with ash into a black paste. She spread it over the wound, binding it fast with a strip torn from her own shirt. Marcus cried out, body arching. Letitia bent close, whispering steady. Breathe. Hear me. You will not die today. She held his leg firm, waiting for the medicine to seep. Minutes dragged like hours. The men fell silent. The only sound his ragged gasps and the faint ticking of the kitchen clock carried on the wind. Then his breathing eased. The fit stilled. His chest rose steady, his face flushed with sweat instead of shadow. A single exhale burst from the crowd, then another, until relief rolled through them all. Lord bless. She saved him. Letitia slumped back, her arms trembling, clothes soaked through. Yet she lifted her head, and at the edge of the ring of men stood Elias. He had not rushed in, had not commanded. He stood with arms folded, his shadow long under the blazing sun. His gray eyes never wavered from her. When Letitia met his gaze, he did not look away. 1 heartbeat. 2. Then his mouth shifted, just enough to draw the faintest curve. A smile. Whether for her or for the life spared, she could not know. But to Letitia, it was the first smile she had seen from him. By evening, when the sky bruised violet and the ranch smelled of hay and cook fire, Marcus was carried into the main house for the doctor's watch. The hands gathered in knots, their talk hushed. No longer did they glance at Letitia with pure disdain. Some gave a nod as she passed. 1 or 2 began to form thanks on their lips, then let the words die. Back in the cabin, she scrubbed her hands raw in a basin of cold water. The cuts burned sharp. Henry, watching with wide eyes, whispered, Sis, you saved a life? She gave a small nod, lips tight. Inside her, something unfamiliar stirred, not pride nor ease, but a warmth unnamed, like fire holding its glow against the night wind. Later, stepping out to spill the basin, she caught sight of Elias by the fence. His frame stood against the dim, shoulders broad, his gaze turned toward the stables. She stopped short. The memory of his smile rose, setting her heart racing. Her mouth opened, words ready, but closed again. For between them words were not yet needed. That look in the burning noon had been enough, a recognition. And in the silence, Letitia knew, for the first time, Thorn Ranch did not feel entirely foreign. All day the sky had brooded, but when night fell, the storm came full. Thunder cracked like cannon fire. Wind tore at the thin boards, ripping shingles from the eaves. Rain poured in sheets, lashing the earth like 1,000 whips. Inside the cabin, Letitia jolted awake at the shrill cry of a horse. Henry slept on, his breath shallow but steady. She pulled a scarf over her head, seized a lantern, and plunged into the rain. Mud sucked at her skirts. Water stung her face. The wind pitched the lantern sideways, its light flickering. At the stable, she saw the animals thrashing, hooves pounding against the doors, rain slanting hard through the sagging thatch. Easy now, easy, she whispered, forcing her voice against the storm. A tall figure came through the downpour, striding as if it were nothing. Elias. His black coat hung heavy, rain streaming down its folds. Without a word, he swung it from his shoulders and laid it across hers, his large hand pressing the edge firm so the wind could not tear it away. That grip sent a tremor through her, not from cold, but from warmth. Together they shoved the stable doors wide, herding the horses inside. tying reins, steadying the panicked beasts. The air closed thick, hot with breath and the smell of hay, rain, and sweat. Letitia lifted the lantern. Its wavering glow lit Elias beside her. The water coursed over his cheekbones, his beard dripping, his gray eyes burning like embers. The space between them was too near. Her heart thudded. "You shouldn't be out in a storm," Elias said low, his voice roughened by the rain. "And you should?" Letitia's lips trembled, but her eyes never left his. He gave no answer, only drew the coat tighter around her shoulders and held her gaze. Too long to be chance. They left the stable once the rain eased, wind still restless but broken. Elias walked her back to the cabin. His coat remained on her, heavy, soaked, yet strangely warm. Inside, the fire leapt in the hearth, throwing gold across the walls. Letitia set the lantern down, stood before the flames, her hands unsteady as she slipped the coat from her shoulders. Elias followed, closing the door. The roar of the storm dulled, leaving silence taut as a drawn rope. Her breath came quick, heart pounding hard. Elias stood a pace away, his shadow cutting into the firelight. Their eyes locked, no longer turning aside. One beat, two. Then Elias stepped closer, slow, as if fearing she might flee. His hand rose, rough fingers trembling as they lifted her chin. Letitia did not turn. Her brown eyes glimmered, wet with rain and something more. Their breath mingled. Then lips met lips, not fierce but deep, trembling, searching, like wanderers finding home after long exile. Letitia clutched his shirt. Elias drew her close, arms binding her small frame against him. The fire crackled, the rain hammered the roof, yet within the cabin the world shrank to two. Breath staggered, eyes fixed, hands found each other in the chasse. Dark wet cloth fell away. On the cold wooden floor, beneath the flicker of firelight, they gave what they had held back too long. No vows spoken, no promises sworn. Only silence, but silence full of meaning. Outside, the storm tore at the land, but inside the cabin, two souls, once broken, once scorned, found refuge in each other. And for Letitia, for the first time in her life, silence was not loneliness. It was choice. It was the whisper stronger than any words. I am here. Together. Dawn after the storm brought a different air to Thorn Ranch. The sky was clear as glass, leaves dripping wet, the ground glazed with a thin sheen of mud shining under the sun. Letitia woke with the fleeting sense of a dream, but Henry's steady breath in the corner bed and the scent of charred wood from the hearth reminded her this was real. Stepping onto the porch, she halted. At her feet sat a small wicker basket. Inside, a loaf of fresh bread, still warm, and a black iron pot of tea, steam curling faint into the morning chill. No note, no mark, but she knew well enough whose hand had left it there. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the basket. A pang rose in her chest, both strange and familiar, a quiet care that asked for no thanks. At breakfast, the ranch held to its rhythm. Long tables, hands crowding benches, the scrape of tinware, the bitter scent of coffee. Yet today was different. Elias, who always kept the far seat, chose the place near Letitia. He said little, ate as ever, but more than once her eyes caught his lingering too long upon her. Whispers spread, inevitable. A few voices low, a few eyes sharp. One man let slip a half-cut jest, But Elias only turned his head, the cold of his gaze slicing enough to shut him silent. Henry sat beside Letitia, still thin, still weak, but brighter in the face. When a cough bent him forward, Letitia reached to steady him, but Elias's hand was there first, large, calloused, yet gentle as it pressed slow along the boy's back, easing each breath. The sight struck her chest. In that moment, Elias was not the distant master of Thorn Ranch, not the man cloaked in silence, but a man capable of care, tender in ways the town would never guess. Her heart faltered, shaken by the glimpse of a face long hidden. When breakfast broke, and the workers had yet to scatter, Joshua, the youngest hand, stepped into the yard. In his grip was a bundle of wildflowers, white and yellow, with red roses brought from town. His cheeks burned, but his eyes shone. The yard hushed. Joshua swallowed, then spoke clear. "Letitia, I have no ranch, no land, no wealth, but I have a heart, and it belongs to you." The words carried across the yard. Every gaze swung to her. A few stifled laughs, a few widened eyes. The air thickened, as if all waited her reply. Letitia stood frozen. Her pulse hammered, not for the proposal itself, but for the weight of so many eyes fixed upon her. And in that instant, without willing it, she sought another gaze. Elias. He stood at the edge of the yard, broad frame cutting half the light of morning. His hand clenched, his jaw set, his gray eyes darker than she had ever seen them. She turned back to Joshua. A decent boy, honest, unhidden. The flowers in his hands brought back the spring festival, when her own bouquet had been crushed under laughter. But now, flowers no longer bore the meaning of rescue. She stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. "You are kind, Joshua. But, heart is not ready." The words carried enough for all to hear. Joshua faltered, then forced a smile. He placed the flowers into her hand, bowed his head, and walked away without sound. The yard dissolved, men breaking apart, whispers still riding the wind. Letitia clutched the bouquet, her chest heavy. Drawing a deep breath, she turned toward the herb garden, and as she passed, her glance flickered toward Elias, a habit too swift to hide. This time he did not look away. Their eyes held, deep and long, no word spoken. Yet in that look, Letitia heard enough. That afternoon, the sun stretched long across the grasslands of Thorn Ranch. Letitia crouched by the herb garden, her hands dirt-stained as she tied the stems of sage with rough twine. The scent of mint and lavender rose from the damp soil, calming her mind. Yet in her heart, the morning lingered still, the way Elias's gaze had rested on her longer than it should, deep enough to rob her of sleep through noon. A child's laugh broke her thoughts. Tommy, the curly-haired boy, came running with a ragged book clutched in his hands. He plopped down beside her, opened the pages, and stumbled through a line or two. Letitia smiled, correcting his words. He looked up then, his gray eyes, so much like Elias's, glinting. "You know, he isn't my uncle at all. He's my father." The innocent confession struck her still. The twine slipped from her fingers, her heart missing a beat. Tommy bit his lip, looking down, as if fearing he had spoken too far. "Don't tell anyone," he whispered. "He said call him uncle so no one asks." Letitia gathered the boy close. her hand trembling as she stroked his sweat-damp hair. In that moment, all the scattered pieces, the silence of Elias, the distant look when Tommy called him uncle, fell into place. That evening, when she went to the well for water, she saw Amos, the old man with a limp, resting beneath a tree. He had visited the ranch before. She knew him as Elias's old friend. She hesitated, then stepped forward, her voice low. "Mr. Amos, may I ask you something?" He lifted his eyes, lined with sorrow yet steady, and nodded. "Tommy, he is Elias's son, isn't he?" Amos was silent a long while, his thin hands gripping the cane. At last he breathed out and gave a slow nod. "Yes. But that's not all, Letitia. The boy is the scar left from a wound Elias has never let the world see." Her throat tightened, her heart pounding. "Please, tell me." Amos spoke slowly, as though piecing together shards of memory. "Elias once had a wife, Isabel. She was fire and beauty both. Cherokee blood and Irish blood met in her, and her eyes burned with it. Isabel made this land bloom, planted flowers round the porch, turned hard ground into home. But her courage drew envy, and envy draws violence." His voice broke. When Elias refused to give up his range, they did not strike at him. One dark night, they aimed their rifles at Isabel on that porch. He held her as she fell, near died himself. But he lived, and from that night he was no longer the man he'd been. Tommy is all that remains. To shield him from the town's tongue, Elias told the world he was only a nephew. Tears burned down Letitia's cheeks, soaking her dress. The image of Elias, cold, silent, turned upon its head. Not pride, not indifference. Loss so deep, it locked his heart away. Amos laid a hand on her shoulder. "Elias needs no pity, but maybe he needs someone who can see the pain and not walk off." When Letitia returned to the cabin, she found Elias standing on the porch. The lamplight split his face in two, half in glow, half in shadow. She turned away quick, wiping her eyes, but his voice, low and rough, cut the air. "You have been crying?" Letitia said nothing. Her throat choked. He stepped closer, halting just before her. He asked no more. From his pocket he drew a white handkerchief and held it out. As she took it, her fingers brushed his. A spark ran sharp and real between them. Elias stiffened, their eyes locking in a silence that stretched long. Then he pulled back, as if afraid the moment might burn them both. Letitia pressed the cloth to her cheek, whispering faintly, "You've carried that grief alone too long." Elias gave no answer, only a slow nod, his gray eyes flickering unsteady. He turned, his shadow stretching long across the damp ground. Letitia stood still, the cloth clutched in her hand, her heart filling with new certainty. Behind the silence was a man who knew love, who knew pain, and who one day might learn to open his heart to her. Night fell over Dust Hollow like a heavy quilt. In the small room behind the ranch kitchen, Letitia sat by the flicker of a lone candle, an old leather journal open on the table. Its pages yellowed, corners torn, yet for her it was the only place she could lay down what had never been spoken aloud. Henry slept nearby. His breath rattled with light coughs. The thin boy turned in his sleep, curling into the threadbare blanket for warmth. Letitia's eyes softened on him before she bent again to the page, the wooden pen trembling between her fingers. "I do not need saving," she wrote, strokes pressed like heartbeats. I only want to be seen. Not as a poor girl, not as a burden, not as a shadow of the past. I want, for once, to be chosen, not out of pity, but because I am myself. Ink bled into blotches. She set the pen down, drew a deep breath. Tears threatened, but she brushed them away, unwilling to leave a trace. Closing the journal, she tucked it into a wooden shelf in the stable, where no one was likely to notice. The next morning, Elias entered the stable in search of a wrench to mend a hinge. As he bent to the shelf, his eyes caught on the leather book left ajar. His calloused hand froze on its spine. He was not one to pry into another's life, yet the words leapt at him before he could turn away. I do not need saving. I only want to be seen. Elias stilled. His gray eyes lingered on the lines, his breath heavy, as though the words had driven straight into his chest. Memory surged. Isabel, the wife he had lost, her fire-lit eyes, her hands planting flowers along the porch. He had believed never again would he look upon another with that same light. Yet now, from a trembling hand and a few scratched lines, his heart cracked open. He closed the book and held it against him. His voice broke rough into the empty air. She does not want pity. She wants someone to choose her. His broad hands gripped the journal tight, as though clutching a truth he had long denied. By late afternoon, Letitia tended the herb patch, kneeling among the mint, her small hands careful with each stem. The cool fragrance rose around her, easing the weariness. Elias approached. His shadow stretched across the soil, falling just behind her. Letitia looked up, startled to meet his eyes. Not the distant gaze she had come to know. Today there was something different. Warmer, as though he were trying to see through all her armor. He said nothing. His hands lifted, broad and hesitant, as if to rest on her shoulders. Yet midway they faltered, hung uncertain in the air. A moment. Two. Then he drew them back, shoving them into his coat pocket before turning away. Letitia's heart pounded. The gesture lasted only seconds, but it was enough. He had seen her. Not a servant, not a poor girl, but the person she truly was, scars and secret longings alike. That night, lighting the oil lamp in her cabin, Letitia lingered on the memory. His hesitation, his eyes fixed too long. She pulled Henry close, trembling yet warmed. Across the ranch, Elias sat alone on the porch of the main house. He stared into the black sweep of the prairie, but in his mind he saw only Letitia bent over the mint rose, her eyes bright with silent strength. And he asked himself, had the time come to end his silence? The afternoon lay heavy, the sky over Dust Hollow pressing fire down on the ranch. The yard bustled with supper chores when a shout cracked from the main house. "The wages! They're gone!" The noise spread fast as wildfire across dry grass. Hands clustered, muttering, eyes darting, each searching for someone to blame. And as if by habit, all gazes turned toward Letitia, the newcomer, dark-skinned, her past still shadowed by the saloon. Martha, the washerwoman who had never welcomed her, lifted her chin, voice sharp as wire. "Search her cabin. Who else here but her?" The words struck like a spark. Hot-headed men wasted no breath, storming toward the small cabin where Letitia and Henry lodged. "Wait!" Letitia rushed to block them, arms spread. "You have no right!" But Henry's ragged cough from inside only fueled their scorn. One man shoved past, knocking her aside, and the cabin fell to chaos. Patched dresses, dried herbs tumbled across the floor. Then a shout. Here it is! The paymaster raised a worn leather pouch, the seal of the stable fund still unbroken. In a breath, the air erupted. She took it. Knew it all along. Saloon trash'll never be honest. Martha folded her arms, lips bent in a thin smile, satisfied with her proof. Letitia stood frozen, her voice shaking but firm. That is not mine. Someone planted it here. No one listened. Whispers and jeers rolled like a tide. The door opened. Elias entered. The room fell silent at once. All eyes swung to him, waiting for his word. Letitia turned, her eyes wet but burning, clinging to him like to a last rope. One word from him, one word of trust, and the world would turn. But Elias stood still, his face shadowed, his gray eyes unreadable. He spoke no judgment, neither guilty nor innocent. He kept his silence, and that silence cut deeper than any verdict. Letitia drew a sharp breath, a faint smile flickering at her lips, the smile of one who finally knows her place. That night, she packed in silence. A few patched dresses, a pouch of herbs, the worn book. Henry, fevered and frail, clung to her. "Where will we go, sister?" he whispered. "Anywhere away. Wherever earth lies under our feet, there will be home." The wind keened outside, carrying them out. The cabin door shut soft. Letitia led Henry down the dew-wet trail, past the silent barns. Each step pressed hard against her heart, but she would not let herself cry. On the porch of the main house, Elias stood, his shadow stretched long across the ground. His fists clenched till the veins rose. He saw it all. How she bent to wrap Henry's scarf, how her narrow shoulders bore the weight of a world. Letitia paused, lifting her face for one last look. A nod, a word of defense, the faintest sign, anything at all. But Elias turned his face away. In that moment, Letitia's heart turned to stone. She tightened her grip on Henry's hand and walked on without looking back. Behind them, the ranch sank to stillness. Only the wind moved the gate, its hinges groaning like the sigh of land left colder for losing its warmth. 2 days had passed since the night Letitia left the ranch. Thorn Ranch felt like a house of mourning. Even the horses moved quieter, no longer neighing when Elias passed. The hands who once filled the yard with noise now spoke in low tones, avoiding his eyes. Elias sat in the stable, his hand running down the spine of an old horse. Each stroke slow, deliberate, as if he could steady himself with the rhythm. But in his mind lived only the image of Letitia walking through the gate, Henry in her arms, her back straight, her eyes dry, not once looking back. That strength shattered him. He had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw hers, eyes that had waited for a single word of trust, but had received only the cut of his silence. On the third morning, passing the wash-house, Elias caught a sound. Laughter. Martha, the woman whose scorn had burned from the start, whispering with the paymaster. "I told you, slip the pouch into her cabin, and the place would erupt. That girl learned her place. Out of sight at last, their laughter sliced him like knives. Even the master didn't defend her," the paymaster sneered. "Too easy." Heat surged to Elias's face. He shoved the door wide, wood cracking against the wall. Martha and the man froze, blood draining from their faces, his eyes cut like steel. "You!" His voice rasped, shaking not with rage but with shame. He said no more. He turned and left. Punishing them would be simple, but how to redeem the moment he had left Letitia undefended? That was the heavier sentence. That night, Elias found the small leather journal she had forgotten, its cover worn soft, the script slanted and uneven. His hands trembled as he opened it. I do not need saving. I only want to be seen. Once. Just once. Chosen, not out of pity, but because I am myself. Elias sank onto the bench, clutching the book to his chest. Regret pressed so hard he could scarcely breathe. You wanted to be seen, he whispered into the dark. And I made you vanish. The next evening, Dust Hollow bustled more than usual. Traders shouted, children ran wild, fiddle notes leaked from the saloon. Into that clamor rode Elias. No black coat, no gun belt, only a worn satchel and eyes heavy as storm clouds. People stared. Elias Thorne, the silent baron, breaking his silence, heading for the wooden platform at the square's center. He mounted it, wind lifting strands of his dark hair streaked with gray. His shadow stretched long. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. What's he doing? He's never spoken in public. Elias drew a breath and spoke, his voice low, rough, yet carrying. You all know what you think of me. Silent, cold, distant. You're not wrong. I buried my grief for years. But the price of silence, he stopped, swallowing pain. That price is losing the only woman who ever truly saw me. The square stirred, gasps breaking. He drew the journal, lifted it high. These are the words of Letitia May, the woman you mocked, scorned, accused, and I let you. He opened a page, voice breaking as he read. I do not need saving. I only want to be seen as myself, not out of pity, only once chosen for who I am. The words fell like blades, cleaving through silence. Heads bowed. A woman's hand rose to wipe her eyes. Elias closed the book, raised his gaze, his gray eyes alight. I was silent, and that silence was crueler than any charge. I let her walk away, believing she was not chosen. Tonight, I break that silence. Tonight, I choose her. Before all of you, not out of pity, but because I need her, as this land needs rain. The crowd hushed. Wind whistled between rooftops. Then a small voice, trembling, rose behind them. Mama! Elias turned sharply. Letitia stood in the street, Henry's hand locked in hers. Her face in the sun, her eyes brimming. Time held still. Elias stepped down from the platform, each stride heavy, until he stood only steps from her. Letitia! His voice cracked. She did not speak, only wept. The weight of wrong and wound breaking loose. Elias lifted his hand, rough, scarred, shaking. I betrayed your eyes, but I will not turn away again. If there is still a chance, let me say at once, Letitia, I choose you, not for the past, not for pity, because, his voice faltered, because I love you. The square held its breath. Henry tugged at her dress. Please, sister. Tears streamed down Letitia's face. The silence stretched, deep and endless. Then her hand, trembling, lifted and met his. Elias gripped it, eyes shutting tight, as though freed from a death sentence. His breath escaped, ragged with release. The crowd broke, applause crashing, some weeping openly. Martha lowered her head, unable to lift it. Elias bowed his forehead to Letitia's hand, his voice firm despite the tremor. "From this day, before all, I will never be silent again." And in that moment Letitia knew he had chosen her, not for pity, not for duty, but for the truth of who she was. That summer, the fields beyond Dust Hollow bloomed brighter than ever before. Wildflowers burst yellow, white, purple, and red, as if the land itself welcomed a new beginning. There was no grand church, no ringing bells, yet every blade of grass, every breath of wind carried a benediction. Word of the wedding spread quickly. Surprise, gossip, disbelief, all gave way, and when the day came, nearly the whole town gathered. Folks who had once mocked Letitia, turned their backs or whispered behind her, now wore their best clothes and sat on rough wooden benches set among the wildflowers. Many brought food, bottles of whiskey, and fiddles, making it into a festival. Letitia stood beneath a simple arch woven with ivy and meadow blooms by the younger women of town. Her dress was no fine white silk, but plain linen in soft cream, edged with coarse lace made graceful in her bearing. In her hands she held wildflowers, the very thing once thrown in scorn, now lifted as her pride. From the far side Elias came. He wore a dark vest, a bolo tie that had belonged to his father. His hair, streaked with gray, was combed back, his eyes deep but alight. At his side walked Tommy, carrying a small wooden box with the rings. The boy struggled to keep pace with the fiddle's tune, then suddenly shouted, "Papa, I stepped on the flowers!" Laughter rippled through the crowd, breaking the tension. Even the sternest faces softened. Letitia looked at Tommy, then at Elias, and warmth filled her chest. When they stood face to face beneath the arch, the wind carried lavender and sweet grass across the field. Elias took Letitia's hand, his rough palm enfolding her trembling fingers. His voice rang clear, resolute. "Today, before all, I speak so no one may ever laugh at her again. No one has the right to call her small or less. This is the woman I chose, the only one who brought life back to Thorn Ranch, the one who taught me that silence is not strength, it is cowardice." The crowd hushed. Many eyes brimmed. At the back, Martha bowed her head, her face flushed with shame. Letitia's voice trembled, yet her gaze held steady. "I never sought rescue. I only sought a place to belong. Today I have found it." The old minister smiled gently and spoke the rites. When he reached the words, "If any object speak now or remain silent forever," the field stilled. Then Tommy shouted, grinning, "I object! If Mama doesn't kiss Papa right now!" Laughter exploded. Children clapped. Grown men slapped knees. Elias shook his head, hoisting Tommy onto one hip, his other arm pulling Letitia close. Amid cheers, beneath drifting petals, Elias kissed her. Not the secret kiss of storm or weakness, but the vow of forever. The crowd erupted in applause. Fiddles struck a joyous tune, and hands tossed wildflowers high, the wind carrying them like colored rain. Letitia opened her eyes and saw she was no longer alone. Before her stood a community that once spurned her, now opening wide. At her side stood Elias, the man who had buried his grief in silence, now unafraid to declare his love. Between them laughed Tommy, eyes bright with faith in the home he now truly had. As sunset spread gold across the meadow, 3 hands clasped, Letitia, Elias, and Tommy walking together through the flowers. The sight etched itself in every heart. Not only a new family, but a testament to forgiveness, to the strength of love rising above prejudice and loss. From that day, no one in Dust Hollow dared call her the saloon girl again. To them, she was Letitia Thorne, the woman who turned a barren ranch into a living home and a stone-hearted man into a husband.